Haiti, our president-elect, will introduce Bobby. Thank you.
Hi there, good afternoon. Hopefully everybody's not going to fall asleep after lunch.
We've got about half an hour before they crash.
Before they crash. Oh, is that how it works? Okay. Well, I was lucky to have breakfast with Bobby this morning, and he is a very interesting man who's done a lot of great things in the healthcare community and in bringing messages across to people in different diverse communities. And that's what he's going to talk to us about today. But Bobby also has two sons, 10 and 14, 12 and 16. 12 and 16, but more importantly, he has two yellow Labrador retrievers. And they're both female. One's a good girl and one is not a good girl. But he might choose to tell you about that later. But anyway, I'm pleased to introduce Bobby Pena.
I have two sons that are brothers and two dogs that are sisters. On a good day, I get one of them to listen to me. So we're going to talk for just a few minutes about effectively driving a message. We're going to use, of course, the forest and the drought as our theme, and we're going to weave in a little Latino outreach, since that's a little bit of what our firm does as well. So we're going to move pretty fast. You will have the presentation. What I'm really walking through is a process. One of the first things we see frequently, way too frequently, is that people miss the mark in the communications campaign or an outreach campaign, whatever you want to call it. And the main reason they're missing the mark and failing is because they're starting at the right place. I get calls from folks who say, because we're in Sacramento, and then they might be in Sacramento, I want to hold a press conference at the Capitol. And that's the call I get. And so I'm left then to backtrack and say, well, wait, why at the Capitol? Why a press conference? Do you know who covers the Capitol? Do you know who reads stuff that's about the Capitol? And more often than not, I find out it's not the audience that they want to reach in the first place. So what we're really going to spend some time on today is how to follow the right steps to get that. So some of the reasons, again, they start at the wrong place. Most people start at vehicles. You're going to see from our process tree, vehicles are your last stop. Vehicles meaning mediums. What am I going to use? Radio, door-to-door, TV. If I'm going to try to be an earned media, am I doing grassroots, social media? That's what I mean by vehicles and mediums. But a lot of times people start there without answering some very important foundational questions that'll help get them there. The other thing is they think they know what people believe or think about the issue, and they don't bother asking. Most of the time you can find out what a community, a group of folks think, and you don't have to pay thousands and millions of dollars for focus grouping and extensive research. You have to be present. You have to get into the community, make a stop at a couple churches, make a stop at an elementary school, make a stop at the local La Superior Latino market, and you can really quickly get a sense without going through an exhaustive focus group. There is a time and place for focus grouping and researching, but you don't need to go through that expense every single time. So I think people skip those steps because they think, well, I don't have the money for that, so they completely miss it, and you don't have to. Or they act as though everybody thinks the way I do, or everybody knows what I know. We call these true believers, and we referenced that a couple times yesterday. And a true believer is good. You need true believers to really drive your message and get motivated. But when true believer comes into a place where they think everybody feels the same way they do, and so we don't need education, or I'm right, and we have to convince them, that's when true believership becomes a little bit of a problem. So we want to make sure people understand that when you're doing outreach, it's about your organization, your issue, but it's really about the person you're communicating to. If the person you're communicating to isn't getting your message, you haven't communicated. And one of the last things is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, is people look at an audience and really don't spend the time to explore that audience and really find out what really motivates them. At the end of the day, you want to move someone to action. You want someone to do something. In this instance, we want people to plant trees is one of the actions we're looking for, correct? We don't want awareness about trees. I love I love when clients come to me, either new or old, and say, I want to spend a year doing awareness. That's all our organization wants to do is awareness. My first question is your CEO on board with that? Because if that's all I do for you in the next year, your CEO's not going to pay for another contract for me, because they probably want action. They either want votes, they want sales, they want action. And so while awareness is good, at the end of the day, we need to move them to action, or you really haven't succeeded. So let's jump right into the process tree, as I like to call it. The first step is who we are. And again, I'm not suggesting you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a branding and analysis process. This is a group of folks, and let me explain for a second the difference between a PR agency and an ad agency. A PR agency, like I own, is going to try to get everything for free. An ad agency is going to buy everything, typically. They're going to look at ads. It's in the name. So typically you have to pay for ads. A PR firm is typically, or a PR approach or an outreach approach, is typically going to look at how do I get, instead of an ad in the paper, how do I get an article in the paper? How do I get on the op-ed page? How do I get on the 6 o'clock news instead of having to buy a commercial to get on this in the same time frame? Grassroots, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But those kinds of things. How can I start using manpower to really get out there? So what we're talking about when I'm saying who are we, this is a group of you, a group of, in an organization getting together and asking the question, who are we? Define yourself. What are our goals? What do we have to offer? What do we really do? And in this instance, what do we bring to the drought issue, to the tree issue, to the climate issue? What do we bring? What do we bring that's different from another organization, a government agency, whatever? But really sit down and define who we are. The hardest part about this is being honest with yourselves. Don't define yourself based on who you'd like to be, or in a perfect world, here's who we are. Define yourself honestly as to where you are now. The next step is, who do you want? So now you know who you are. You know what your goals are. You know what your issues are. Now the next step is, and a lot of folks miss this because you ask them, who do you want to reach? And what's the typical answer I get when I ask someone who they want to reach? Everyone. If they've got $1 billion, I can reach everyone. Short of that, it's going to be hard. So what you're really looking at here is, what are the groups that you really need to move to action? And you're going to have to prioritize. Defining your audiences often means prioritizing, which organizations sometimes struggle with doing. Who do I need to reach first? Who's top priority? Who's second priority? Who would I really love to reach, but that's going to be year 2? That's the honest conversation. So who are you trying to reach? And then you're going to need to segment them down. It might be, we're going to use Latino audience here as an example as well. One of the things, and it came up a couple times from Jose and others this morning, is that there is no one Latino audience. There is no one Latino experience. The problem has been one of the problems has been reaching out to the Latino audience is, I'm translating into Spanish, so I'm doing Latino outreach. You're doing Spanish language is all you're doing. So the reality is, you need to define your groups, and really get to know them. Dig into who they are, if it's Latino, what generation. There's so many Latinos, I think people often now think, well, we're reaching the Latino market, we're reaching a migrant population, we're reaching a new population. I think in Jose's presentation this morning, the reality is the Latino audience you might be reaching might have been here for 10 generations, 5 generations. It's not a new audience. And so many Latinos are broken out. Some of them are our first generation, second generation. Myself, I'm 4th generation on one side, 5th generation on the other side. I live my daily life in English, but the difference is I understand and I'm part of Latino culture. I'm bicultural, as Jose was saying earlier today, and you need to understand that the makeup of that. One of the things that we often say about the Latino community is that even though I don't live my daily life in Spanish, or might not struggle because I live my daily life in Spanish and things might not be as easy to access, I'm not far removed from someone who does. So when I look at a product or a service, I'm often thinking about cousins who didn't finish high school, who immigrated here, that are second cousins or something, that I'm in regular contact with, that don't live life the way I do. So a lot of it is I'm not very far removed, and so oftentimes we're thinking not just of ourselves, but of other folks, of other people in our families. So again, break down your audience, really look at what your audience believes, what they know about your topic or issue. And then there's those other things. What are the social economic status of the groups you're trying to work at? What is the language? If it's Latino, what is it? The honest reality when we're doing outreach in California to the Latino audience, if we have to be broad brushed, and we hate doing it, but if that's what it takes, you typically lean Mexican heritage in California. And you're not going to be that far off. Where it really starts changing dramatically is when you get to the Bay Area in California. You're suddenly now talking more Central Americans, South Americans. The education level becomes a little higher. So knowing those nuances is also important when you're translating. I know we had the conversation earlier about translating. We used to have on our team a young guy. We hired him right out of college, right out of UC Davis, and he was Nicaraguan. Nicaragüense, he'd like to say. And we'd work on translation, and he'd start translating. I said, Jairo, I don't think this is going to work. Well, in Nicaragua, this is how we'd say it. And the conversation, my pushback to him was, yeah, but we're reaching out to a bunch of Mexicans in Fresno. We're reaching out to my people, my cousins in Fresno. So Nicaraguense Spanish isn't necessarily the Spanish we need to be focusing on right here today. So understanding those important differences is going to be key. Motivators, this is key. Once you know your audience, once you've defined your audiences and prioritized them, spend some time getting to know them. Spend some time getting into the community and determining what motivates them, what drives them. You know, for moms and dads, it's going to be children. Most of their decisions are going to be based on, especially in lower income, but really we've seen it when you're talking Latino and middle income all the way up. Most of the decisions they make are going to be focused on children. So understand that, know the decision making, who makes the decisions in the family. We used to do some work for Blue Cross, and we were hired at the same time as an ad agency, and they came in and we were supposed to work together. We had never met each other, but we were supposed to work together on this campaign. And our first meeting going in, we had shared our plans with them. The ad agency we're still working on the last minute, so we hadn't seen their plan. And the first thing they say when we go into the meeting is, we're going to build, and they were trying to sell family insurance products in the Latino community. They said, we're going to focus on the husband, because the husband in a Hispanic family, in a Latino family, makes all the decisions. Very patriarchal. And I sat there trying to figure out when to expose them. And the guy that hired us was hitting me saying, you know that's not true, would you say something? So I finally had to speak up and I say, in theory they are correct, but if you target a Latino father, they're not going to get it. The one who's going to be looking at something like health coverage is the mom. Yes, nothing happened in my home without my father putting his stamp of approval. If you want to say he's the decision maker, that's fine, but you couldn't market at him because typically it was just a courtesy that my mom afforded him. Okay? So, but they had taken that, they had read that somewhere. They had read patriarchal culture, husband makes the final decision, we market to him. So it's those kind of nuances. Take a look, ask the questions, determine in your community, in whatever target audience you're trying to reach, what really, truly motivates them. What's going to drive them to action? What's going to make them move to the other side of the street and act? What's going to make them plant a tree? What's going to motivate them to plant a tree? So one thing I want to talk about in the Latino community is the holistic you. And it's important when you're marketing to them. If you spend significant time, if you can watch Spanish television, if you can get away with any Spanish, spend an hour watching English television, and then spend an hour watching Spanish television. The one difference you're going to see in good Spanish advertising is in general market English, it's predominantly advertising to you, Melissa, Jose, Cindy. The only place it differs slightly is when you're talking about products a mother would buy, Tide, things like that. Things that she's going to buy that affect her family is where it suddenly starts changing. In the Latino, good, focused Latino advertising often focuses more on the holistic you. How my product or service is going to impact Bobby, Bobby's family, and Bobby's community. And again, it goes back to the point where oftentimes in a Latino family, whoever is maybe speaks the best English, if the services or elements aren't available in Spanish, is going to often take information back to the rest of their family. It's very much I mentioned yesterday, I worked in health plans and hospitals and HMOs for years. My wife is a registered nurse. Anything comes up health related in our family, cousins, grandparents, parents, we get the call. We are the designated healthcare experts. And it's not uncommon in Latino families. They'll have a kind of a go-to source in the family. So always keep that in mind. Oftentimes, again, they're thinking of not just themselves, but how it will impact their family and their community. So now we know who we are. We've defined ourselves. We've defined our audiences. We've segmented our audiences. We've prioritized our audiences. We've gritted our teeth and said, I really want this audience, but these are priorities and I'm not going to get to them till next year. We've done that process. Then we've talked about what motivates them. Now we can finally talk about, we know the audience, we know what motivates them. Now we can finally start talking about message. What do we need to say? What do we want to say? And most importantly, where are the people at on our issue? Before we can sell or put the action statement into effect, how much do we have to educate? What do we have to educate about trees and drought before we can, should our first message go out and be plant a tree? In some instances it could. In some instances you might need to do some education as to why a tree is important. Or maybe just some education about trees. And then the second meeting is, by the way, we could really use you to plant a tree. So understanding what you need to say, what you want to say, and where you might need to mix in some education there first. One of the things you also have to think about is how the message is going to play in different groups. You might come in with a general message, but once you've defined your groups and your motivators for each of those groups, now you can really start tweaking that message to resonate with them, to be relevant to them. Again, this is important. It's not about us. We live with it every day. We live with trees every day. Talking about the holistic we here. And so it's not about what's us, it's about the audience that we're trying to reach. How do we make the message salient to them so it'll resonate with them? So now you've got, what do we have? We've defined ourselves, we've got our audiences, we've talked about motivators, we've got our messages. Now this is crucial, and I know it came up earlier today. The deliverer could make or break you. So in your organization, we talked about this yesterday in media training, who's going to be the best person to deliver a message? Does anybody know when you're talking about health, and you're talking about care, especially at a mom, maybe talking about caring, who is the most respected person to hear from? It's actually a nurse. Yeah. Does anybody know why? It's a woman, often, it's a woman. It's actually because, we were looking at this when I was working at health plans, we were looking at some of this. Doctors, people view them as, they're trustworthy, but they make a lot of money, is what people thought. And nurses, actually nurses make pretty good money. I'm married to one. She does okay. But they don't carry that same belief. That same belief doesn't stick to them. They're in there for caring. They're in there taking care of people. I've seen them. You know, when you go visit your family members, if you go visit a grandfather in the hospital, you don't typically see the doctor. They come in once or twice a day to check in. You see the nurse caring. So that messenger, so oftentimes when we've tried to educate on health issues, we've used nurses whenever possible because they're very believable in that instance. So what you're doing here is you're creating an army. And a lot of times this is especially important if you haven't done Latino outreach before and suddenly you're doing Latino outreach and you've picked, I want to be in Fresno, I want to be in Modesto. And I'm brand new to Latino outreach in Fresno or Modesto, or I'm brand new to Asian American outreach in Modesto or the Hmong community in the Central Valley. if you want to be the messenger as your organization, you want to be the one, and I'm going to drive every message, you're going to need to spend months building up trust, breaking down the trust barriers. Whereas if you find the right organization that already is in the Hmong community and bring them along, educate them so that they're part of your process and they're a partner, and they go in selling your message, talking about your message, believing in your message and driving it, you've suddenly broken down the trust wall. And I'm now acceptable because they brought me in. A handful of years ago, we were also working for Blue Cross, and they wanted to start using the matrícula consular, the Mexican consulate ID card, as a valid form of ID to purchase health insurance. You either had to have a social security card or a driver's license. And they wanted to start using the matrícula consular. They weren't the first health plan that did it. 2 other health plans had done it before. They had never talked about it because they were afraid of getting an anti-immigration, or that you guys are supporting immigration, backlash. It took us about 6 months to convince Blue Cross to do it. We said, don't worry about it. English language press isn't going to pick it up anyway, so they're not going to write articles. We can message around this, and it's going to be a positive for you. So one of the things we had suggested is let's do a partnership with the Mexican consulate. Let's see if we can hold a press conference at the Mexican consulate. First thing the Mexican consulate said, and I think we started in Los Angeles, first thing they said is, we won't endorse you. We don't endorse anybody. So that's fine. Can we hold a press conference at your location? Would you mind introducing us? And at the press conference, you don't need to say you like us. You don't need to endorse Blue Cross. You don't need to do anything. Just, would you be there with us? And they said, absolutely. It's a good thing. And you're saying you like our card. So of course we'll introduce you. We were going to do 3 really quick press conferences in about a 2-week span. We held one in Los Angeles, and the phones rang off the hook. And so within 24 hours, we had changed our plan. We thought, no, we think we can get the phones to ring and those are the sales vote. Those were the calls to buy insurance. We said, we think if we space these out, and next month do one in San Francisco, and the following month do one in Sacramento, and then San Diego and Fresno, we could get national Univision coverage almost every time, and we did. And the most important thing that we learned out of that was when people called, 70% of the people that called, of course they said, well, yes, we'll sell you health insurance. Do you have your matrícula consular card? And they said, yeah, but I also have a social security card and a driver's license. So they didn't ever need that. The difference was they trusted the Mexican consulate. They didn't trust Blue Cross at first, but they trusted the Mexican consulate. And even though they never endorsed us, they never endorsed the product, they never endorsed Blue Cross, that partnership, that relationship was all that was needed to break down and say, you know what? As a community, we're going to trust you, and we're going to buy health insurance from you. So it's that important. Go into a community, find an army, create an army of messengers, of partners who can really start driving your message, who can be one in a campaign with you and help you drive your message. Now we finally get to where people want to start, where I get most of the calls. Now we know who we are, we've defined who we are, we've defined our goals, we've defined our audiences, we've prioritized our audiences, we've made those tough decisions, we've discussed, and we now know what motivates them to move to action, right? Now, and then we've created messages, we have the messengers, now we can start thinking, are we buying radio ads? Do we just need to place articles? Is it grassroots outreach? Now we know where we need to be, given all the foundational information that we have. One of the things I would urge you to think about, when I graduated college in '90, the main job for a PR person was to get you in the press, earned media, get you on the newspaper, get you on the radio, get you on the 6 o'clock news, get you on Good Day Sacramento, those types of things. The reality now is that as fewer and fewer people are utilizing traditional mediums, even if they're going to the SAC-B, they're going online to read it. The reality is you need to think more broadly. Think not just, it used to be what are they watching and listening and reading. Now think more broadly of where do we think and where do they live, work, and socialize. We're still looking at media consumption as well. But you're also really thinking about live, work, and socialize because that's where they're spending the majority of their time. If you have a mom and dad spending 5 hours every Saturday at a soccer field, you know what? For a couple minutes, they might take their eyes away from the soccer game for a second. About 3 games in, they might take a break. That might be a great place to reach them. They're in a park. There's trees. There's kids. They've got 5 hours. It might be a good place to reach them. So start thinking about where they're living. When we start talking about socializing, we're also talking about social media. What are they on? Are they on Facebook? You know, the teens were on MySpace. They were on Facebook. Then all of us joined Facebook, and the teens got off Facebook and went to Instagram and other stuff. They're always about 2 years ahead of us. Once enough of us old people get on board, all the teenagers leave. So really think about where they are, where you can reach them, where there's already a comfort level. Don't reach them when they're not comfortable, where if they're living there, if they're working there, if they're socializing there, it's a place of comfort. Maybe not work. A couple things specifically to understanding the Latino community. Again, when I graduated in '90, my first job was at a medical center in Linwood, California, St. Francis Medical Center. And it was an interesting neighborhood because it had gone from, in the 50s, an Anglo community to an African-American community, and was now transitioning along. Huntington Park was probably 10 years ahead, was now transitioned to a Latino community. And so the hospital brought someone in to give us cultural sensitivity training. And for years, that's what it was, which I believe is no more than don't offend anybody, don't piss anybody off training. And unfortunately, that's really what it was. What I'm going to tell you today is if all you're working on is sensitivity, don't bother. What you really need to be working on is understanding and partnership. When I make a pitch, when someone brings in 4 different PR firms to do Latino outreach, here's my tip. I always try to be the last firm in for the day. And the first thing I say is you probably just heard from 3 or 4 firms who have all told you they're going to help you speak to the Latino community. If that's all you want, you don't want us. And if that's all you're going to do, you're going to miss the mark. Because the Latino community and the Asian American community, the African American, any community understands the difference between speaking to me, which they actually see as speaking at me, versus rolling up your sleeves and partnering with me and being part of the community. So a lot of what we're doing when we're talking about Latino outreach now is grassroots. It's creating the partnerships. Is this gone? Did I do something? We good? No? Oh, there we go. Okay. Is this one better? Is it back?
No, this is the mic that's in this room. Just use that. Okay. Yeah, the both.
I think we're good.
Just try to speak into the bell at the same time.
Is this good?
So use both.
Oh, I'm going to use both. All right. Okay. It's going to minimize my dancing, but that's all right. So as I was, if I remember what I was saying before, the real reality is what you want to do is create relationships, find the organizations, and really start working with them as a community. If you're really just speaking at them, they get the difference. Everybody's jumped into the market years ago when they saw the census skyrocketing, and they said, we got to get in the Latino community. What has happened is groups came in, they didn't see huge sales in the first quarter, and they jumped out. So the Latino community is very sensitive to that. A little skeptical of new players coming into the market. So you might need to actually spend some time creating relationships and getting to know them and helping them understand that you're in for the long haul and you're in to work with them, not speaking to them. The couple other things to understand, before you really jump into this audience, are you ready? Are you going to go to the Spanish-speaking community and no one in your staff speaks Spanish? Or you haven't created a relationship to have someone to come with you that speaks Spanish? We did work for an organization one time that had all their sales material in Spanish, but then once someone actually signed up, they didn't have any member material in Spanish. I think that's called bait and switch. I'm not sure. I think that's what it's called. And we said, you're not ready, because the expectation is going to be everything's available in Spanish because you sold me in Spanish. but now you can't serve me in Spanish. So that was really problematic. So ask yourselves those kind of operational, am I ready? Am I going to start getting phone calls in Spanish or in Mandarin? If so, you probably should have someone who can answer the phone in Mandarin. If you've decided I'm going to reach out to the Mandarin community, and 60% of people in this community speak Mandarin as their first language, and they're going to start calling you, I would suggest you have someone ready to speak Mandarin that answers the phone. So think through. You'd be surprised how many times people don't think through these kinds of steps. Are you operationally ready? Do you have the team to serve the community from a language perspective? And are you really ready to go? So here's what you're going to do when you get back to your places of business, to your hometowns. I want you to pull a small group together. Doesn't have to be a ton of you. There might only be 2 of you in your organization. That's fine. 2 people as a group, in my opinion. Start asking those tough questions. Start asking yourself those questions and working through them. Start building an army. Who do you need out alongside of you to start moving people to action? Make a list of every group you want and every media in your market. Then start making the call. And the first point, we talked about this yesterday. Everybody was there yesterday. Is tired of hearing me say this. The first message that you're going to say is, hi, I'm X. This is what we do. This is our organization. How can we help? We want to be a resource. The key word is resource. We want to be a resource. We want to help. We want to educate folks on the drought and trees, everything you do. And how can we be a resource? Don't reinvent the wheel. Again, there's organizations that are doing this. Partner with them. Find organizations in the community that already have. I think there was a question about what happens if you don't have, if there isn't community, if there aren't teams, if there aren't partners there. Look deeper. Is there churches? Are there schools? Some of these organizations might not be the ones that can help drive it, but they've got an audience. And so maybe you might need to create the leader, but go to the local school. I can tell you that principal is typically a very trusted source in that local community. So the faster, the more you can build relationships, the faster you can break down that trust cycle. And one word on social media we talked about yesterday, so I just want to share it with everybody else. A lot of people want to jump in the social media realm. You need to do it more frequently than you think. One post a week, one post every 2 weeks doesn't work. Get on Facebook, you see how quickly the timeline goes. If you haven't checked in for 2 days, if you want to catch up with all 2 days, you're going to be there for hours. So you're going to have to post frequently. Create a cycle. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, like clockwork, I'm going to post. I'm going to post on Facebook. Twitter's probably even a little bit more. And don't try to create one at a time. Find organizations, find these partners that already have the audience that you want, and connect with them. Like them, follow them. Hopefully the natural step is to reciprocate, but then also follow up with a call and say, here's what we're doing. We'd love to be a resource for you, for your constituents on this topic. They're hearing a lot about drought. We'd love to help explain what they're hearing. How can we share that? So let them know that you've actively engaged them in social media. Ask them if they'd like to be a social media partner. And not only can they follow you and like your stuff and retweet your stuff, but then you can also share information with them on a weekly basis. You're sending them, here's the tweets for the next week. Here's our Facebook posts for the next week. Make it as turnkey as possible, and you should be able to build an army. I think that's it.